to request Mr. Sarangji to please enlighten our students and please make us aware a little bit more about this technology. Mr. Sarangji.
Great. So Kuldeep, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much, Mr. Rathor, for the kind words. My Hindi is not that great, but I think I understood most of what you said. So I'm really glad for the warm welcome that you guys have given us. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, guys. And if you can see my screen, and if my audio is audible and it's clear, it
Yes,
would
sir.
be
Yes.
great if the students you can just type in a yes in the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you can see it, just type yes in the chat box, and that helps me understand if you're able to see my screen or not. Thank you, Aniket. Thank you, Bala. Great. So looks like a few students replied. So thank you so much for that feedback, guys. Before I get started, I kind of wanted to set some very fundamental rules for this particular session. We have planned this for at least 1 to 2 hours, right? So that's very, very long. And, I've tried my best to make this session as interactive as possible. In fact, when we finish this presentation, we will all build our own computational fluid dynamics software using Microsoft Excel, right? So that's going to be the challenge that we are all going to be working towards. Now, this course is essentially a fundamentals course. So if you already have some background in CFD, you will still be able to learn a lot from it. But if you have never heard CFD and you're just interested about it, this next 2 hours is going to be very, very helpful for you, provided you you make you may you take you make use of this interactive session. Use the chat box that's provided to ask questions. So I have the chat box open on the screen right now, and whenever I see some relevant questions, I will be answering it on the fly. All right. And Mr. Kuldeep, do we have a particular schedule, like how long can I take for this particular presentation?
No, Mr. Sarang, you can do on your comfort.
Great. So there is no time constraint. That's awesome.
No, 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 please.
Great. All right, guys. So before we get started, I wanted to share a few words regarding SkillLink. Some of you might, oops, 1 second. Okay, I'll just have it like this. Looks like these slides are not loading, but I'll just have it in this view. I hope you can still see it. So a few words about SkillLink. So SkillLink is essentially an e-learning platform, and we focus on application-based advanced engineering courses. And we are part of Y Combinator. So most of you know companies like Reddit, Dropbox, Airbnb. They all started at Y Combinator. Y Combinator is a California-based startup accelerator, and every year around 30,000 students apply. 30,000 companies apply, and the selection rate is close to 1%, if not less. And we were extremely lucky in getting selected in Y Combinator because they saw a lot of value on the type of courses that we provide. And so, like I said, I'm Sarang. I'm the guy on the left-hand side, and there's another co-founder for this company, Surya. We both did our masters in mechanical engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My focus was primarily on IC engine combustion and CFD. And then once I completed my masters, I went and worked for a company called as Convergent Science, which develops computational fluid dynamics software for solving hard problems. So I was lucky enough to get opportunity to work with great companies like General Motors, Fiat Chrysler, Ford, Red Bull Racing, and General Electric to work on a wide variety of computational fluid dynamics problems, not just engines, but for external flow applications on large aircrafts, for for optimizing the intake ports of racing cars. Pretty much a lot of cool stuff, right? I was very lucky enough to get these opportunities, and one of the reasons why we started SkillLink is to offer the same level of experience and same level of exposure to industry focused projects. And that's how, we started out. And so far, for in the last couple of years, we have grown reasonably well, and we offer extensive industry relevant training programs in several areas, right? And our courses are basically taken by students from around 56 countries. And you can see that it's 23 here, but the number has changed. It's 56 countries, and we have trained around 5,000 students in form of individual courses and career programs. And recently, we have also started something called as skill centers. So these are physical locations in Chennai, Bangalore, and Hyderabad, where we provide an immersive learning experience in our cutting edge facility, where students get access to really awesome computers, official softwares, and so on. Essentially, to kind of summarize about the company, we provide industry relevant skills, and we try to make sure that students get relevant job opportunities by teaching them, by providing them the right training. And that's why we are so excited in partnering with Vikrant group of institutions, because we like to partner with institutions that are such so forward thinking and see the value in what we are doing. So for that, again, I would like to thank Vikrant group for giving SkillLink an opportunity to do this. And last but not least, just like any student wants, placements are super important. So one of the things is SkillLink has successfully placed more than 250 students in the last 12 months in core companies. So none of the placements were in an IT company. All of them were core engineering jobs and core technological jobs. That being said, let me try to switch over to full screen, and I hope it's going to work from now. Great. So in today's talk, there are two things that you guys will definitely learn at the end of this webinar is what is computational fluid dynamics, and you will understand the math behind CFD. If I'm able to meet these two objectives, if I'm able to help you guys understand these two topics, my job for today would be done, and I would be extremely happy, right? And this is where I would need your help, right? I will be asking a lot of questions. Only a few people are commenting to me, right? Feel free to comment. Feel free to ask as many questions as possible. There is no such thing as a bad question, right? If just type whatever occurs to your mind, I'll try my best to answer it. Okay, great guys. I hope you're all excited as me. So let me get started. So first of all, what is CFD? Well, CFD stands for computational fluid dynamics. It's essentially a technique that's used to simulate fluid flows. So what I can do is I'm just going to play a simple video that I got from YouTube. It belongs to a YouTube channel called Blast Rider, and I'll just play this first and I'll let you guys see this. I hope you can all see the type of animations that is being currently shown, right? So here you can see that there is water flowing like this, and from the other end, and they're all colored, right? There's some red colors, blue colors, and green colors. And here you can see that we are just filling up a tank of water with some water. And then here you are looking at smoke simulations, right? Where the smoke is basically going. And here you're seeing fire plus smoke simulations, right? And here we are showing you the same simulation with much more higher resolution. And this is where here you're actually looking at how the waves in oceans are simulated, right? And here you're looking at solid dynamics. Basically, we're showing how fracture occurs in walls and so on. Now, this right here, for example, now would be a good time for me to pause the video. This right here is a great example for computational fluid dynamics. The idea is very simple. Fluids, right, like air and water, move in real life. Inside your engine, we all know that air and fuel mixture is burnt to produce energy, correct? But most of you don't know that when you have air and fuel mixture and when they actually are ignited, the ignition point occurs at a centralized location, and that is where the flame starts. And the flame propagates through the combustion chamber, and it consumes the air and fuel mixture in this process work is generated, right? And this is what you would call as combustion. Now the problem is, if you take an IC engine, this entire process occurs in 10 milliseconds. In other words, before you can actually perceive what's happening, the combustion process would have been over several thousand times. And if you take your engine at the end of the day, you have just air and fuel mixture going through it. So air is a fluid and your fuel is also a fluid. Now what I can do is I can create the geometry of my IC engine using a CAD program like SolidWorks. And then I can use computer software to see how fluid actually flows into my engine. And this essentially is what you call as computational fluid dynamics. Whenever you are using a computer to simulate how fluid moves, you can call that as computational fluid dynamics. Now, that's awesome, right? Because with that idea, you can kind of simulate fluid flow in pretty much any engineering system that you want, right? So to kind of summarize, what type of fluids can you simulate? Liquids and gases, right? Now, here's a simple question, right? Based upon whatever I have told so far, can you think of any electromechanical system that comes to your mind where CFD can be used? Now, this is a two-part question. So you have to tell me where, and you have to tell me why else. You have to tell me why you would use CFD. An example, I'll give the first answer. I would use computational fluid dynamics to simulate flow inside an IC engine because I want to see how the flame front moves inside the combustion chamber. That is my answer. Now, can you guys think of a reason? Can you guys think of an answer? Okay, Ankit Mishra says fan, but Ankit, can you elaborate on that a little bit? And guys, let's take 10 to 15 seconds, not more than that, because we have a lot of people. I want to make sure that we don't spend a lot of time on these small question and answer sessions. Can anyone else think of any other answer? Again, guys, your comments are visible only to me, so you don't have to be worried about your friends looking at your comment. Anirudh Singh, wind load on building. That's really awesome. So wind load on building, when you're developing high-rise building, right? What's going to happen is as air flows over the building, it creates pockets of low pressures and high pressures. This is what you would call as vortex shading. And what happens is on one side of the building, you have normal pressure, and on the other side of the building, you have slightly lower pressure. Because of that, there is going to be a resultant force which acts on one side of the building. And this is what you would call as wind load on buildings. And Anirudh, that's a great answer. Vijay says wing of aircraft to see how streamlines act. That's awesome. Chetan says turbines. Great answer, guys. And thank you so much for the responses. So now I can actually show you a few examples that I think you would appreciate even more. So, now it's the era of electric vehicles. People talk about electric vehicles a lot. We all know that there is a huge battery pack that sits on the floor of an electric vehicle, and that is what is the source of energy, correct? Now, this battery pack can get immensely hot when you're charging the battery too fast, or if you're say driving at a very high speed. So you need to make sure that these battery packs are liquid cooled so that they stay at an optimum temperature. This is what you would call as using CFD to simulate flow over a battery pack. In fact, technically it should be flow through a battery pack, but I guess that doesn't matter. The second example is what I gave, which is flow inside an engine, and I hope you guys can understand. Now, from a safety point of view, another application where CFD is used is fire simulations. So when you're constructing really large structures, for example, large theaters, depending upon the country in which you are actually depending on the country in where you are actually building the structure, the fire regulations and safety rules are different. So typically for large multi-million dollar projects, people do a lot of fire simulations, especially if it's an industrial construction. The whole idea of performing a fire simulation is to quantitatively understand what happens if there is a fire and how it's actually going to spread. So if you're not able to think of an example, think nuclear reactors. When you're constructing nuclear reactors, you're right, you need to make sure that any fire that accidentally occurs away from your nuclear reactor core doesn't actually reach to the nuclear reactor core, right? Then that would be fatal, obviously. So fire simulations are done, and the background or the fundamental technique with which that is done is computational fluid dynamics. Then now let's talk about residential applications. We all have most of us, we stay in a flat or in an individual house where there is a water reservoir, right, in the form of a well or in the form of a sump. and you have an overhead tank, storage tank, where you have to pump the water, right? Pump the water too, and you use a centrifugal pump or a reciprocating pump depending on where you are. Now, what's going to happen is when people design pumps, you need to make sure that the pump's impeller tips cause as low of a pressure drop as possible, because that determines the amount of work that is wasted in moving the water from point A to point B. Computational fluid dynamics can be used to determine the load on these impeller tips also, meaning you can actually calculate the force that the water imparts on the, the impellers of your pump, and then calculate if that impeller can withstand it, right? Very simple example. Then comes flow over an airplane, which is exactly what Vijay Sajan pointed out. You have to make sure that when you're designing really large commercial crafts, they need to produce a reasonable amount of lift force, and they need to be able to produce that lift force with reasonable amount of efficiency. So what I mean by that is lift force essentially tells you how many passengers and cargo a plane can carry. And then if you look at the drag force, that tells you the efficiency with which the plane can actually carry these many passengers, right? So if you think about it, one of the reasons why one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of supersonic flights, right? For example, let's take Air India, right? Why don't they have supersonic flights? It is not that they're hard to make. The problem is that the operating costs are so high. Remember, if you take a simple fluid mechanics concept like drag force, which is proportional to half times rho times AV square, the amount of drag force is proportional to velocity square. In other words, when you're traveling supersonic, your drag force essentially increases proportional to the velocity square. So when you're going supersonic, the drag force is just ridiculously high, and the amount of fuel that you will actually spend in just overcoming the drag is just so high that the airlines, like if Air India is having a supersonic flight, they will have to they will have to charge you a silly amount for say traveling from Mumbai to Chennai, right? You'll have to pay several lakhs. I'm probably thinking somewhere upwards of 10-15 lakhs for traveling from Mumbai to Chennai, but this is going to be in hypersonic mode, which means your travel time is in the order of just a few minutes, right? And since there is no business case for it, that's why you don't see a lot of supersonic flights. But at the end of the day, while designing supersonic flights, computational fluid dynamics are used to make the process of flying from point A to point B as efficient as possible. Now, you can kind of use the same concept anywhere there is fluid flow, right? You can think of biomedical examples. In fact, towards the end of the presentation, I will have an example where I can actually show you how computational fluid dynamics can be used to design artificial valves. Okay, so here is an important question. So how can a computer do all of this, right? That could be an obvious question that you guys have. And my answer is very simple. Well, computers are very good at solving linear equations. And this might not be very clear for you. And you might just say, so what, Sarang? I mean, how does that help? Well, let me walk you through a couple of examples. And what I'm about to going to do next is very important, and I want all of you to participate. So even if there are some faculty members on the call, I would highly encourage you guys to just attend this, because I think this is a very fun exercise. Okay, I hope you guys are ready. Now, if you have already seen this in a different workshop that I conducted, please don't reveal the answer. Okay, all right, here comes the question. Okay, so you say that you go to the shop and you want to purchase one packet of milk and one packet of coffee. The cost of milk and coffee is $1.10. Okay, and the cost of milk is $1 more than the cost of coffee. So what is the cost of milk and coffee? Just type your answer in the comment box, and I will read out the answer if I get a correct answer. In the meantime, I'll just repeat the question. Cost of milk and coffee together is $1.10. The cost of milk is $1 more than the cost of coffee. What is the cost of milk and what is the cost of coffee? Let's all take 30 seconds to do this. Guys, try to participate. I know that we have a lot of people on the call. Like I said, if you make it interactive, you will find the session useful as well. So far, I've got one answer from PSN, and PSN's answer is $1.10. That's actually not correct. Okay, we have one answer from Mr. Stephen. $1, Stephen, that's wrong. Ankit, yes, your answer is correct, but I won't read out the answer. We'll just give a few more people. Okay, Adarsh Vinayak, cost of milk is $1 and cost of coffee is 10 cents. Adarsh, that's unfortunately wrong. Anirudh Singh, and your answer is wrong. Imanshu Shekhar, yes, your answer is correct. So far, we've got 5 answers, out of which only 2 are correct. Gajanan, unfortunately, your answer is wrong. So I'm seeing that the most common answer that I get is that the cost of the milk is $1 and cost of the coffee is 10 cents, right? That's the most common answer that I'm getting. But guys, that's actually wrong. And here is why. See, if you look at this, the cost of milk plus coffee is $1.10. So yes, the first equation is getting satisfied, but the cost of milk should be $1 more than cost of coffee. So if you say that the cost of milk is $1 and the cost of coffee is 10 cents, the difference is 90 cents. The difference is $1. It's not $1. So the way you would actually solve this, right? You take this problem and you would convert it into 2 simple equations. The first equation is the cost of milk plus coffee is $1.10, and the cost of milk is $1 more than coffee, which means if I take the cost of milk and subtract it with the cost of coffee, I'm going to get $1. I have 2 equations and I have 2 unknowns. Now, if I solve it, what's going to be the answer? It's going to be 0.05 cents for coffee and 1.05 cents for cost of milk. And that's exactly what a computer is really good at. All right, so now you might be a bit more confused than before. And you might say, but Sarang, this is an easy problem, right? This is an easy problem. Well, yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. But what is so for milk and coffee example, we can easily write down the equation. But what about a problem that looks like this? Where would you even start, right? This is so complex looking, right? How can I get a simple equation? Well, the answer is again very simple. The equation is not a simple equation. It turns out that if you actually derive an equation for fluid flow, you get a system of equations. So what do I mean by a system of equations? Well, I mean a group of equations. A group of equations and a system of equations mean the same thing. So in this case, I have first equation, second, third, and fourth. So I have a system of 4 equations here. And these equations are called as governing equations. Why the term governing? Well, it's called as governing equations because they dictate how the fluid behaves. In other words, these equations govern how fluid behaves. And these equations are really popular. These are called as the Navier-Stokes equations. Now, Navier-Stokes equations are really, really old, and they are part of the Millennium Prize problems. Now, for those of you who have never heard of Millennium Prize problems, these are really complex mathematical problems that have not been solved for a while. What do I mean by not solved? If I give you a simple equation, dy by dt is equal to e power t or is equal to t, then you will be able to solve the equation using variables and separables, right? You would say that y is equal to t square by 2 plus c, or y is equal to t plus c, depending upon what's on the right hand side. That is what you would call as an analytical solution or an exact solution. Now, for the Navier-Stokes equations, if you were to do the same thing, you will have to figure out a formula for rho. Rho is the density of the fluid. You will have to figure out a formula for u, which is the x component of velocity. Similarly, v, w, and e. E stands for the energy of the fluid. If you are able to come up with formulas for u, v, w, and e, for the equations that you're seeing on the screen, which is the three-dimensional Navier-Stokes equations, then do you know how much cash prize you can win? Does anyone know what's the cash prize for solving the Millennium Prize problems? Does anyone know? You guys should take a guess because it's a fascinating price. Okay, so looks like I'm not getting any responses, but that's fine. Yes, Vijay Sajan, you're exactly correct. The price for solving the Millennium problems is $1 million. So that's close to 7.4 crores in Indian rupees if you're able to solve these equations. Many people have tried. There have been a lot of movies where people pretend to be trying to solve this. But as of today, as of this presentation at least, there is no general solution for these classes of problems. So then now you might be even more confused. Well, Sarang, you said that if there are equations, then we can use a computer to solve it. But now you're saying that the equations are there, but there's no way to solve it. I'm confused. Yes, what you're saying completely makes sense. And the answer is very simple. When we use a computer to solve these equations, we don't solve it exactly. In other words, you can actually apply some tricks so that you convert these equations. And by the way, these are partial differential equations. And these equations are second order partial differential equations, right? So you can take these equations and you can convert it into a form which will help you solve it. And this process is what you call as discretization. But before I jump into that, I wanted to add a few more words about what these equations actually mean, because the equations look very messy, they seem very complicated, right? So what do these equations actually mean? Well, if you look at the continuity equation, it's a fancy way of saying that mass is conserved. That's it. So if I take a look at this first equation, right? Let me see if I have the annotation option available. Okay, looks like it's not there. The first equation essentially says mass is conserved. That's it. The second equation says momentum is conserved. And since momentum is a vector quantity, you will have momentum along x, y, and z. That's why there are three equations for momentum. And finally, you have one equation for energy, right? Which says energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. Okay. So now that we know what these equations are, let's try to learn more about what discretization is, because with discretization, I will be able to solve these equations. Okay. So here's the thing, right? So for example, if on the left hand side, I have a term. Now this seems like an ordinary differential equation, right? dy by dx, or at least a term in an ordinary differential equation. Whereas if you look at this, what does dy by dx actually mean? It means rate of change of y with respect to x, right? So if that's a bit confusing for you, think of this. Let us say y represents the marks that you score in every semester and x represents the semester. So in this case, dy by dx would essentially represent how the marks that you score in a semester changes with each and every semester. And this is what we call a slope, right? We call it a slope. Now I can figure this out by using the formula y2 minus y1. Sorry, there's a typo here. y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Now this is the form that we all use. In fact, I'm assuming that most of you are mechanical engineers, and when you studied your thermal engineering or heat transfer, you might have used a steam tables book, right? Where you have to do interpolation for calculating the enthalpies or entropies of steam at 10.5 degrees Celsius, right? The book does a clever job of giving temperatures the book does a clever job of giving the properties at 10 degrees Celsius and 20 degrees Celsius. And in your exam, they always ask you to compute the properties at somewhere in between so that you actually do the interpolation. Okay. But at the end of the day, when you're actually interpolating, you are using the discretized form of dy by dx. In other words, there are some exact operations that you can perform through which you can convert dy by dx into this form, and that process is called as discretization. Okay. So then the idea is, you know what? just like dy by dx, I have so many terms in my Navier-Stokes equations. d rho by dt, right? Essentially rate of change of density with respect to time. Here I have rate of change of x momentum with respect to x. I have rate of change of v momentum with respect to y, rate of change of u momentum with respect to x again, and so on. So these terms that are very complex, these are called as convective acceleration terms. If you have not taken a fluid mechanics course, you will not understand that, but don't worry about it. You will be able to understand this only when you take a full-fledged course on computational fluid dynamics. And when you actually derive the governing equations yourself, you will be able to understand what those terms are. But here's the whole point. To discretize them, if I look at here, I have dy by dx and I have it as y2 minus y1 by x2 minus x1, which means if I have d rho by dt, I should be able to write it as rho 2 minus rho 1 divided by t2 minus t1, right? I hope you guys can see, I hope you guys can see that. And if I do that for all the terms, I essentially end up with a discretized equation. Okay, so now what we are going to do is, we are going to do this for one term, and I'm going to explain the process in as much detail as possible. Okay, all right. So before we move forward, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much have you guys understood the concept that has been conveyed till this point? So if you have understood the concepts very well, you can put in 10. If you did not understand the concepts, you can just say 1. That way I'll get some feedback and I can adjust my pacing and adjust the complexity of my examples. So let's take like 10 to 30 seconds. Okay. So Chetan says 7, Vijay Sajan says 9, Stephen 5, okay, Anant 9, Himanshu 8 out of 10, Ajit 5, Ankit 8, Gajanan 6, Shivam 10. All right, so I think overall, I can say that the average is anywhere between 6 to 8, which is actually good. So that means you're learning something that's that's seeming a bit difficult for you guys. It's not super hard. At the same time, it's not super easy, because if it's super easy, everyone is going to say 10, and then the whole point of this workshop might not be satisfied. The fact that most of you are giving me a score between 7 and 8 tells me that this is a like the concepts that I'm explaining are a bit challenging, but they're not too hard, which is kind of what I'm expecting here. So I think that's good. Okay. Now what I have here is I have a function. Okay. Essentially, this function can represent anything. It could be velocity as a function of x. It could be temperature as a function of x, and so on. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to take one point on this curve, and the value at that location is f1. Okay. And similarly, I have to take another point, and the value there is f2. And I basically look at the x-axis. So at x is equal to x1, the value of the function is f1. And when x is equal to x2, the value of the function is f2. All right, so I hope this makes sense, right? Now, now what I can do is I can draw the tangent at this point. So this is the tangent line, and dx is nothing but the distance along my x-axis measurements, and df is the distance between my y-axis measurement. So df divided by dx is essentially the slope of this particular curve. But here's the problem, right? When I do df by dx, essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to join these 2 points, right? I'm trying to join these 2 points, and I won't get the tangent. So the only way I can actually get a much more accurate representation of the slope is by moving this point towards this point. In other words, if I make dx smaller, I will be able to accomplish this particular result. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to open up a different application where I can draw a few diagrams on pen and paper, which will kind of help me explain this in a bit more detail. So I'll be stopping the screen share for like 10 seconds, and it should be back up very quickly. Okay, guys, I'm sharing my screen again. I hope you guys can see it. So what I meant in my previous example was, say that I have x and I have my function, right? So if I have a curve like this, if I use this point and this point to draw a straight line, which is essentially the slope, right? Because in order to compute the slope, I need 2 points. So this is basically my slope, whereas at this point, the slope is actually like this. So you can see that there is a huge error, and the error can be quantified as the angle between the correct slope and the actual slope. The actual slope is not really a slope, it's actually a secant. So right, so this is a secant and this one is a tangent, right? Now the angle between the secant and the tangent is essentially the error in the solution. Now what I can do is, in order to minimize the error, so I'll draw the same curve again. I'll have my first point here, and what I'll do is I'll take my second point exactly, closer by 50%, right? Somewhere here. So now what I can do is, if I take these 2 points, this is my slope, but this is my computed slope. Like the dashed line is my actual slope, and the solid line is the computed slope. And this time the angle is smaller. So now to kind of complete the example, what I can do is, I can take my first point here, and I can take my second point really close to my first point. So somewhere here. So my slope would be like this. And if I actually draw the correct slope, which would be dashed lines, that's going to be very close. In other words, the error tends to 0 as dx tends to 0. So what is dx? Dx is the distance between these 2 points. So this is dx2, this is dx1, and this is dx3, right? So dx1 is greater than dx2, and dx2 is greater than dx3. So in other words, as dx becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, the error becomes smaller and smaller as well, right? And that's the whole idea here. When you are saying that, dy by dx is equal to y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Oops, sorry. The error in dy by dx depends upon this, depends upon x2 minus x1, the distance. All right, I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to jump back to the presentation. So again, as before, I'll take a short 10 seconds to do this. All right, so I think we're back to where we started. Let me see if there are any questions in the chat box. Okay, great. Looks like there are no questions. So now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be explaining how we got the formula y2 minus y1 by x2 minus x1. We have all used it, right? We have all used it for a while. The formula seems very, very intuitive. It's very, very natural. But where did it come from? Well, it all came from Taylor series, right? So if I go back to the previous example, if I have to compute f2 from f1, right? I know f1, and if I have to compute f2, I can use this formula. F2 is equal to f1 plus df1 by dx into dx. There's a small dx multiplication that I've forgotten here, plus k1 times d square f1 by dx square plus k2 times d cube f1 by dx cube. This is your simple Taylor series, correct? Now, this is something that most of you would have studied in your first semester or maybe in your high school, depending upon the board that you studied in. And we might have never thought of the application of the Taylor series. In fact, it turns out that it has tons of applications, and you will see that in a second. So I have this Taylor series, right? And guys, one thing I want to say is it's perfectly fine if you do not remember what Taylor series is. The whole idea is, if you want to perform Taylor series or calculate the terms of a Taylor series, the only thing that I care about is if you are able to take the right math textbook, show me the Taylor series formula, and then compute it. If you are able to do that, and if you're able to understand why Taylor series is useful, then that's the skill that you have learned. It's a skill that you can put it in your pocket and you can use it whenever you need it in the future. You don't have to by heart it. Okay. Coming back, I have my Taylor series expansion written down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that, you know what, the higher order terms, the terms that have higher powers like squares and cubes, I'm just going to ignore it. Okay. I'm just going to ignore it. So then what I have is I have f2 is equal to f1 plus dx times df1 by dx. So this is the dx that I had missed in my previous slide. So I'm ignoring this previous term. Now you might ask, well, Sarang, you're ignoring it. Doesn't that affect anything? Yes, it does. In other words, f2 is not, if f2 is no longer exactly equal to f1 plus dx times df1 by dx, it's only approximately equal to. In other words, this equal to sign should be substituted and it should be modified as to an approximate equal to sign. Okay, but we're not going to do that. I'm just going to simplify this a bit more. I'm going to take my f1 to the left hand side. So what's going to happen? I will have f2 minus f1 on the left hand side. Okay, so right, so that's what I've done. Now what I can do is I can take dx to the denominator on the left hand side. So if I take dx to the denominator, I will get f2 minus f1 divided by delta by dx, right? And that's exactly what I have here. And I have df1 by dx. Now, if I just look at this and if I just rearrange this, you have df1 by dx is equal to f2 minus f1 by dx. On the left hand side, we have the differential form. On the right hand side, we have the linear form, right? Now remember, this is the formula that we use and we always say that this is exactly equal to f2 minus f1 by dx. It's not, it's only approximately equal to, because we obtained this form by neglecting a whole bunch of equations, by truncating a whole bunch of equations. What does truncation mean? Truncation means to cut, right? So since we are truncating terms to get an expression, the error that we get in this process is called as truncation error. And this is the first thing that you need to understand in CFD. Because if you understand truncation error, you can then figure out expressions for various partial differential equations. Now let me blow your mind. The process that we just now followed not only applies for computational fluid dynamics, it applies for strength of materials. Sorry, it applies for strength simulations. It applies for multi-body dynamic simulations. It applies for so many other type of simulations. In other words, whenever you're trying to solve a differential equation, you will have to use discretization technique. In other words, you have to convert the differential equation into a form that computers can solve, which is linear equations. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, so what do we do next? I have come up with an expression. What do we do next? I can use this equation and I can give it to a computer, and now a computer would be very happy to solve this. And this is discretization, guys. The process of discretization that we followed in this example is called as the finite difference method. Now there are three such techniques that are commonly used to solve differential equations. Now when I say differential equations, it includes ordinary differential equations and also partial differential equations. So what are the three techniques? You should be writing this down. It's finite difference method, finite element method, and finite volume method, right? Now here's the thing, I did not say if that governing equation is for fluids. I did not say if that differential equation is for solids. All I said is that you have a differential equations. In other words, it doesn't matter what the domain is. The differential equation can be for a financial model. The differential equation can be used to model disease spread. For example, how coronavirus spreads. It could be used to model fluid flow. It could be used to model solid mechanics, whatever you want. I can use the same differential equation, or I can use the same techniques, finite difference method, finite volume method, or finite element method to solve the differential equation. That's it. So when you guys are in your 7th semester, there is a subject called finite element method or finite element analysis. One thing that I see all the students telling me is that finite element analysis is used to solve solid dynamics or solid problems. That's completely incorrect. Finite element technique is a technique to solve differential equations or to solve boundary value problems. which means you can use it for solving CFD as well. But the thing is, it's not used because of other considerations which are completely beyond the scope of this particular lecture. It's a fairly advanced topic. But the thing that you guys need to understand is that when you're learning FEA, you're learning a technique to solve differential equation, which is an amazing skill set to have. If you are an engineer, you should possess that skill because that takes you a long way. You go to a career where it's more defensible. You'll be able to work on more hard problems. And if you don't do that, you will be stuck in a career where you do simple tasks. And whenever you do simple tasks, chances of it being automated are very high. And that's how people lose jobs because of automation. They don't lose jobs because automation does not destroy all mechanical engineering jobs. Automation destroys jobs that are simple to do, which means if you're doing things that are just essentially a set of steps and there's not a lot of thinking involved, that's a job that automation can solve. As simple as that. Okay, now whatever we have discussed so far, well, that's just discretizing the equation. Now, guys, remember I showed you how to discretize one term. Your Navier-Stokes equations contains multiple terms like that. So you have to discretize each one of those terms to get a final discretized equation. I hope that makes sense. So now who does what? Well, if you take a software like ANSYS, right, it's going to discretize the equations for you, or you can write your own code in C++. A software like ANSYS is going to create the mesh for you, or you can write your own mesher. A software like ANSYS is going to solve those equations. It's going to solve the linear equations. Remember the equation m plus c is equal to 1 and m minus c is equal to, actually m minus c is 1 and m plus c is $1.10. That's actually a system of linear equations, except that it has only two equations. I can use a computer to solve it. In CFD, your system of linear equations is very big. Your linear system or your system of equations has millions of equations, which means you cannot solve it using pen and paper. So the algorithms that you learn, like Gaussian elimination, right? Those algorithms are actually coded in softwares like ANSYS actually do those type of operations behind the scenes. And that's why it's super important to learn linear algebra for mechanical engineers, because you can understand how different solvers work. But the problem is students often do not know this information. They are not able to connect this and they lose interest in the subject. And when they come for a talk like this, they understand that, you know what, that subject is very important. I should go back and study it. If that's the case, do it. Those subjects are very, very important. They will be useful and it's a lifelong skill. And the best part is computational fluid dynamics is slowly, as future goes, computational fluid dynamics is going to be more AI and machine learning focused, which completely depends on linear algebra. So you have to anyway read it. All right, I'm going to take a quick water break, guys. So just bear with me for like 5 seconds. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat box. Maybe we'll do that. We'll take 1 to 2 minutes for answering some Q&As. It can be it can be a generic question. If you want to learn about CFD, or if you want to do a particular project in CFD, or if you're wondering about career opportunities in CFD, any questions that you have, just put it in the chat box. I will read out the question aloud, and so that way it can benefit everyone. Okay. So let's maybe take 1 minute to 2 minutes to do that. Yeah, please go ahead, Bhushan. So it looks like a student called Bhushan has a question. So Bhushan, feel free to type your question. Karthikeyan, feel free to do the same. You can type your questions and I will be able to just read them aloud and I will be able to answer it so that I can answer it for everyone. Okay, so I'm getting a few requests from students to get my email ID. So guys, I will definitely do that. I don't think I can publicly send my email ID because there's no provision in Zoom for that. I can only email Professor Kuldeep. Uh, in fact, what I'll do is after the end of this particular presentation, I'll share my email. You can basically you can email those questions. So Karthikeyan, for the single derivatives, you shown the discretization methods, but what about second order derivatives? That's actually a fantastic question, Karthikeyan. In fact, towards the end, I think I have just a few more slides. I will be showing you, how to build your own CFD solver using Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, right? When I do that, I will be deriving or I will be performing the discretization for a second order term. Okay, so we have one question from Bhushan. So Bhushan has completed his diploma right now in BE. And Bhushan, see from if you're currently a BE student, any past experience would be very useful for you. And any projects that you do that are industry relevant during your final year and third year, if possible, even during your second year, is going to add a lot of value with respect to placements. All right. So moving on here, you can see that the first three steps, right? Discretizing the equations, creating a mesh, and solving the equations are done by ANSYS, or you can write your own computer programs. And this is the type of skill set that I want you guys to acquire. Try to build your own solvers. The amount of knowledge that you gain in doing so is just incredible, guys. So you should all do that. And then once you've done that, everything else, analyzing the results, getting the data for engineering, performing validations, design change, reiterating all the process again, that's what an engineer does. Now what happens is I see students skipping the first 3 points and directly analyzing the results. If you do not understand how discretization works, if you do not understand what truncation error is, how will you set up the CFD simulation correctly? Now, the same question can be asked for any type of simulation tool. At the end of the day, remember, simulation tools are solving really hard math problems. It is solving the problems which you cannot solve using pen and paper. But here is the thing, if you do not understand how the problem is solved, you will not be able to understand the results it gives. In other words, you will not know if the results are correct or not. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Abhishek, how to interface ANSYS Fluent with MATLAB for optimization? That's a great point, Abhishek. So usually there are several techniques. Usually what happens is any software program, they would have interfaces, programming interfaces, which is essentially going to be a port which listens for connections from a different software program. Okay, so you will actually, it's essentially like a client server application. It's going to be like a plugin that ANSYS provides so that it can read information or it can communicate with MATLAB and it can pause accordingly. But that being said, if you're interested in performing optimization, you no longer have to use MATLAB for it. ANSYS Fluent provides a set of optimization libraries which would automatically do it for you. You don't have to use MATLAB to do it unless you're doing a lot of advanced stuff where you're changing a bunch of inputs, or in other words, you're performing a series of calculations to just get the inputs that are required by ANSYS Fluent, right? Because ANSYS lets you do DOEs, which is design of experiments, optimization, parametric studies quite easily. So there is no real reason why you need to couple ANSYS Fluent with MATLAB. But again, there are some corner cases where you might have to do that, but I'm not sure if that is your requirement. Abhishek, I hope I answered your question. Okay, so what are the other steps? Well, we kind of understood what governing equations are. We did not dive deep into it, but we realized that there are governing equations, right? I hope you agree. Then there is something called as numerical discretization, with which I can take my equations and solve it on a computer. Now here's the thing, then how many governing equations do you need? Well, that depends upon the physics of the problem. If the flow is turbulent, if there is spray involved, if there is combustion involved, if the fluid is interacting with a solid, then you will need additional governing equations, which will again be differential equations. Now, what you need to do is you need to discretize all these equations to solve, and only then you would get answers. But here's the thing, before you get an answer, you need to provide the boundary conditions. When you're solving differential equations, you provide boundary conditions, right? You might have solved problems where you do things like, okay, at t is equal to 0, y is equal to 1. That's what you would call as a boundary condition. Boundary condition helps you communicate to the computer about quantities that you already know. For example, if I am simulating a flow inside a battery pack, I know what the flow rate is. So my flow rate would be the boundary condition. Okay. Without boundary condition, ANSYS Fluent cannot figure out what the boundary condition is because it has infinite. You have infinite possibilities. Viresh, which source do you advise to learn ANSYS Fluent? So with respect to learning outcomes, I think Rohit would be able to give you a much more better picture towards the end of the presentation. So Viresh, your question will be answered towards the end of this talk. I hope that's okay with you. So then there's questions like, okay, should I do a steady simulation or a transient simulation? So these are terms that you will see in any solver. It could be CFD, FEA, multi-body dynamics, and whatnot. Only the details will change, but these are the fundamental steps in any simulation package. Now you might be wondering, Sarang, I don't understand what steady and transient is. It's not very clear for me. Well, please hold on for a few more minutes. You will definitely understand it. Okay. So what I have here is I have results from Capvidia, FlowVision. FlowVision is a company that does CFD. This is what you call as the Living Heart project. So let me just play this guy. So here you can see that you have the geometry of a human heart. The human heart is beating, and you can see that there is some flow that's actually going on. There are a couple of valves here. You can see that the valves open up. When they actually open up, the fluid, which would be the blood, flows through it, right? You can see that the fluid is flowing through it. Now, here's the thing. Why would you need to do something like this? Well, it's very simple, right? There are patients, right, who have conditions with the heart. Now, by no means I'm an expert in hearts, right? But I do know that some people are born with heart valves that are very, very weak, and they might need surgery where those valves are replaced by mechanical valves. Now, the problem is you can design the mechanical valves in SolidWorks, but how would you test it? You can't just simply operate on that patient every time you have a new design, right? That's not at all possible. In fact, the only way you can do so is by using simulations. So here, this is a computational fluid dynamics simulation, right? In other words, this is what you would call as a biomedical application where CFD is basically used to design mechanical valves. So the valves that you see here, the dark gray colored valves, they are mechanical valves. So when we actually simulate the fluid flow through it, we are looking at the pressure that's acting on these valves, and we are determining if the valves are strong enough. And not only that, you can actually look at the pressure drop across the valve to see if this valve is going to be compatible with the patient. Will the patient be comfortable with these valves? And the whole heart, right? Your heart is different from my heart. The entire geometry of the heart was actually created by a set of 3D scanned images. People do 3D scans like CT scans or MRIs, right? They are examples of three-dimensional scans because they give you a 3D view of whatever you're looking at. You can take those slices of images and you can reconstruct them to create the 3D model, and that's what you're looking at here. So imagine if you have a robust technique that can simulate flow through hearts, then you can basically create an application, a software application, where the input would just be uh, scanned images from MRI or CT scan, and the boundary condition would be the person's ECG, right, which dictates how the heart muscles are moving, right? I can use those two information and I can perform a dynamic simulation for that person's heart to figure out if if I can put this valve, or if I can, do something else, right? And that application is just very, very interesting, and it's going to be very, very useful if it is developed. But here's the problem. It's super hard to do so because there are so many unknowns in the problem. But that being said, say that you want to do something like this. What governing equations will you solve? Well, we have to solve the momentum equation, continuity equation. And the most important equation here is, you can see that the heart muscles are also moving. So you need to solve fluid structure interaction. You need to take that into account. Essentially, you have to solve the differential equations which dictate how the heart moves when a particular force is acting on a particular point. You would solve all these equations as a function of time, right? Because the heart muscles move as a function of time. And whenever you take time into consideration, that is what you would call as the transient simulation. Okay. Now, what is the expected output in this case? Well, the expected output could be what is the pressure force acting on the valves. All right. Great. Let me see, guys. Do you guys have any questions at this point? I have one question from Abhishek Agarwal. Which software is good for CFD analysis? Is it SolidWorks or ANSYS? The short answer is it depends, Abhishek. Now, if you want to learn CFD, you should learn any CFD tool that's at your disposal, and you really don't care about what tool that you learn. The thing that you need to focus on is that, remember, ANSYS Fluent is a tool. It is not a solution, right? Just because you have ANSYS installed in a computer doesn't mean it's going to do the engineering for you. You have to have firm background in thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, and then you need to be able to pick up a problem statement, propose a solution. It could be a design solution, right? And you use CFD to test your hypothesis. That's the whole point. Okay. So Abhishek, I hope I have answered your question. And guys, if you have any other questions at this point, do let me know. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the most simplified CFD solver in the world. Okay. It's a bit exaggerated, right? Because it's not a full a 3D CFD solver. In fact, it only takes a few terms, right, from Navier-Stokes equations. But I'll kind of show it to you. So I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to move to the whiteboard for a second so that I can demonstrate this. So I'll stop share. So let me just open up my whiteboard, and all right, I hope you can see my screen again. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the Navier-Stokes equations. Okay, looks like there's a comment. So guys, are you able to see my screen? If you can see my screen, just type in yes. I just want to make sure that before I start the derivation. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you, Bala. Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Rohit. All right. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with the Navier-Stokes equation. I'm just going to take the x momentum equation, dou u by dou t, which is saying rate of change of velocity with respect to time is equal to u dou u by dou x plus v times v dou u by dou y. So these are the convective acceleration terms which are present because of bulk velocity. And this is going to be equal to minus dp by dx, pressure gradient, right? Because in the direction of increasing velocity, pressure actually decreases. That's why there is a negative sign. Plus mu times dou square u by dou x square plus dou square v by dou y square. Sorry, this should also be u. Right, so this is your x momentum equation in two-dimensional form. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that my system is steady. My system is steady. In other words, things don't change as a function of time, which means dou u by dou t is 0 because things don't change as a function of time. So the derivative will be 0. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I have only diffusion. I'm going to be looking at only diffusion, and convection is 0. I'm going to say that convection or bulk flow is equal to 0, which means these two terms will be dropping off. Then what I'm going to say is, you know what? I'm going to be saying that pressure drop is also 0. You might be wondering, well, what's a like which real problem in the world has so many terms in the 0? And I'll kind of get to it. So now with all the terms in 0, you can easily see that I have the equation dou square u by dou x square plus dou square v by dou y square. Sorry, dou square u by dou y square is equal to 0. Now here I'm going to say that u is equal to temperature. So dou square t by dou x square plus dou square t by dou y square is equal to 0. So now this right here is what you call as a Laplacian equation. This equation represents how heat transfers in a solid. Now think about it. If you have a plate like this, and if I'm heating the plate at the top, what's going to happen? The heat is only going to diffuse, right? The heat is going to diffuse in this direction, and it's going to make things towards the end of the plate. For example, somewhere here, it's going to heat it up. The temperature is going to be maximum at this location because that's where the temperature is high. For example, the top wall can be 900, the other walls can be at 600 Kelvin. So the temperature is going to get distributed in this direction, right? And the equation, the governing equation for that is this guy. Dou square t by x square, dou square t by dou x square plus dou square t by dou y square is 0. And the best part is you can see that we derived it by making the right assumption. When heat is flowing, there's no there's no change in fluid velocity, right? Heat is getting conducted, right? Heat is transferring, but it is not transferring because of fluid flow. And that's why this equation makes a lot of sense. And I'm able to derive an equation for solid heat transfer from Navier-Stokes equations, which I think is pretty cool. All right. So now that we have the governing equation, we need to figure out how to discretize it. Well, that's where I'm going to be spending the next 10 minutes. So let me take the same rectangular plate, guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the rectangular plate like this, right? Essentially, I'm going to cut it horizontally and vertically, and this is going to look exactly like a chessboard. I'll take this point and I'm going to call this point as P. P stands for point, right? So this is the point of interest. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a point on the left-hand side and I'm going to call it L. L stands for left-hand side. So you might guess what this point would be called. It's going to be called R, which is the right-hand side point. Similarly, I'll have top and I'll have bottom, okay? Just remember this, all right? Just remember this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a graph like this, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the P point here. I'm going to take the R point and I'm going to take the left point. The y-axis is temperature and the x-axis is going to be distance along the x-axis. So now with Taylor series, what I can do is I can compute the temperature in the right-hand side point. So temperature in the right-hand side point is equal to temperature at the location P plus dou T by dou X into delta X plus dou square T by dou X square into delta X square by 2 factorial plus higher terms. Similarly, the T left is going to be Tp minus dou T by dou X at P delta X plus dou square T by dou X square delta X square by 2 factorial. And this is also measured at P. This is also measured at P. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract these two equations, or actually I will just add this equation. So this is equation number 1. This is equation number 2. What I have is I have TR plus TL is equal to 2 times TP. Now these two terms are going to cancel out because one is plus and the other one is negative, right? So these terms will get canceled out during the addition process. Plus these two terms are exactly identical. So I'll just add them up. 2 times dou square T by dou X square delta X square by 2 factorial. Okay. So now 2 factorial is 2, right? So this term and this term are getting cancelled out. So what I will have is TR minus 2TP plus TL is equal to dou square T by dou X square into delta X square. Now I'm ignoring all the higher order terms. So this is not exactly equal to, this is approximately equal to. So now I'm going to just simplify this furthermore. I'll say that dou square T by dou X square is equal to TR minus 2TP plus TL divided by delta X square. Now look at this. So to compute d square T by dx square, I have T right minus 2TP plus T left by delta X square. Now you can do the same exercise for dou square T by dou Y square, and you will get, instead of right, you will get top minus 2TP plus T bottom divided by delta Y square. That's it. Now what I have to do is I have to add these two terms and I have to equate it to 0, right? Because if we go up, that's what my differential equation is. I have to add these two derivatives and I have to equate it to 0. So if I come down here, what will I get? Let me do this. So I have TR minus 2TP plus TL by delta X square plus TT minus 2TP plus TB divided by delta Y square is equal to 0. Now I'm going to assume that delta X is equal to delta Y. So what does that mean? If I go to my graph, this distance is delta Y and this distance is delta X. So I can easily assume that delta Y is equal to delta X, which means the spacing, essentially my computational cell, right? My cell is going to be a square. That's what it means. So if delta X is equal to delta Y, then I will have TR minus 2TP plus TL plus T top minus 2TP plus TB divided by delta X square is equal to 0. So we are almost there. So if I just simplify this 2 more steps, I will get my final discretized form. You have 2TP here and you have 2TP here, right? And this delta X square, when it goes to the other side, it's going to be 0. So on the left hand side, you will have T right plus T top plus T, sorry, actually you will have T left plus T top plus T right plus T bottom is equal to 4 times TP. In other words, TP is equal to TL plus T left plus T top plus T right plus T bottom divided by 4. In other words, what we are trying to say here is that the temperature at this point is an average of temperature across the 4 neighboring points. In other words, the cool thing is this equation, right? This equation is the same as dou square T by dou X square plus dou square T by dou Y square is equal to 0. And that's mind blowing, right? This is a differential equation. It's a partial differential equation, second order form, but this right here is a linear equation. This equation can be solved using a computer, but this cannot be solved. Now, the key thing to understand is that if I'm calling this as A and B, A is only approximately equal to B. All right. This is super important. All right. So now what we're going to do is we are going to fire up Google Sheets and we are going to implement this. Now, before we do that, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you understand the last few concepts that I mentioned with respect to discretizing dou square T by dou X square plus dou square T by dou Y square equal to 0? Please comment in the chat box. In the meantime, I'll just stop sharing my screen and I'll quickly jump to Excel. Ajit Navi, thank you for the kind words. So Ajit has rated 10, which is great. How about others, guys? Sudarshan, 9. Thank you so much, Sudarshan. How about others? Aniket, 10. That's awesome. Great. All right, guys. So really appreciate the positive comments. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what I'm going to show is, I'm going to show you the Excel calculator that I have built. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say that um, the temperature everywhere, right? So I'll just say that this temperature is going to be 600. Okay, so what is happening here? I'll be explaining it. So here, this is the rectangle plate that I talked about, right? So here you can see that I have some gray colored cells. So this is what you would call as a computational cell. Now the great reason, the great thing about Microsoft Excel is that it is very similar to a computational program, right? So when you're creating a mesh, it's exactly going to be like cells, and Excel already has them, or Google Sheets already has them. And here what I have is the top cells are at 900 Kelvin. Looks like there's a comment. Okay. And the right hand side, right? If you look at the right hand side boundary, I'm going to say that they're all at 600 Kelvin temperature. And I'm going to do the same thing for all the boundaries. So if you see here, the right hand side is 600, bottom is 600, everyone is 600, right? Now, what should I do? Well, I should take my inner nodes, and I have to say that the temperature there is just the average of all the four neighbors, right? How would I do that? Well, I would say this is equal to this guy, the top cell plus the right hand side cell plus the bottom side cell plus the left hand side cell. And you can see that the formula is appearing here. I've added all the four temperatures. All I need to do is just compute the average, which is divided by 4. So when I do that, I can get the answer here. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to, for the time being, I'm going to set the top wall temperature to be 600 as well. So now you can see that everywhere the temperature is 600. I'm going to take this formula and I'm going to loop it for all these internal nodes. Okay. Now for all these internal nodes, you can see that automatically the temperature values are being recalculated so that the temperature at each and every cell is the average of all the 4 points. And you can see that it took some calculations to do it, right? These are what you call as solutions iterations, right? It's a term that you see in CFD. It's a term that you see in FEA and whatnot. You can see that in some of the cells, the temperatures are not 600, but they're very, very close. Here, the temperature is 599.99999, which is almost 600, but it is not exact 600. And this is what you would call as numerical solution. And here you can see that you can get the solution only up to a desired level of accuracy. It cannot, the error cannot be absolutely 0. It's not possible. Now with this, I'm just going to change the top wall temperature to 900 Kelvin, and almost instantaneously and in a beautiful manner, the temperature everywhere starts to recalculate. Essentially, that's what happens when you do CFD. Calculations are being done so that the calculations satisfy the original differential equations as much as possible. And when you do that, as a consequence, you can see that these numbers, they change themselves in a way to give you the temperature distribution. But here, when I look at this, the temperature distribution is not easy to understand, right? So what I can do is I can visualize it. I can select all these guys and I can do a quick conditional formatting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a color scale and I'm going to use a color map. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the minimum number is maybe 600 Kelvin, where it's going to be green. And when the number is say 800 Kelvin, it's going to be yellow in color. And when the number is say 900 Kelvin, it's going to be orange in color. So now you can see that when I modified the color map, I'm automatically getting the temperature distribution. And this is why Excel is super powerful, guys. What I can also do is I can increase the temperature. For example, if I change this to 1200 Kelvin, you can see that the temperature is increasing and more cells are starting to get higher temperature, right? And you can see that the heat is getting transferred, more and more computational cells are hotter than before. And similarly, what I can do is with such a tool, I can immediately change the right hand side temperature. For example, I'm changing the right hand side temperature. Now heat is going to get transferred in this direction as well. You can see that the temperatures here are slowly increasing. And then now you can see that this region of the plate is suddenly more hot. Now this is such a simple tool, but the amount of insight that this offers into CFD and finite element analysis super huge, because at the end of the day, when you do finite element analysis, when you're solving a problem like plate with a hole, this is exactly what's happening. You are solving some governing equations. The equations are converted into a linear form using the finite element technique. That's it. So if you just learn the finite element technique properly, you will be able to create programs like this. Okay. So that being said, I think that's all I had for today's presentation, right? And I think we are doing very well in terms of time. I wanted to complete the presentation in 1.5 hours, and I think we were able to do it successfully. So guys, I would like to take 5 more minutes for questions, and then after I answer some questions, I believe Mr. Rohit would be taking would be going over his part next. Uh, Professor Kuldeep, let me know if that's not the case. I've stopped sharing my screen, guys. But then what I can do is I can still look at your chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be answering a few questions. I want to check the strength of 3D printed bone scaffolds, which are different porocytes before before fabrication. How can we validate the materials? See, here is a slight problem. See, if it's a customized material, uh, then what's going to happen is, without material properties, performing simulations is not at all useful, because you're not going to get an accurate result. Now, that being said, where can you actually get properties? Now, depending upon the type of simulations that you're trying to do, for example, if you're doing a static analysis, right, then you essentially need to understand, you need data of that particular material being tested in a UTM machine, right, in a universal testing machine, where they can actually give you the stress strain diagram. So Professor Sahu, if you do not have the stress strain diagram for that particular material, that's not going to work. And here is another problem, right? In stress and strain diagrams, or if you take the stress strain diagrams, how it's obtained experimentally is by performing tensile load, correct? The problem is, in your application, if the load is not a tensile load, and if it is an oblique load, meaning there is a shear component and there is also a tensile component, then 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 things are going to be slightly different for you. And that's where you have to rely upon theories of failure to come up with a suitable metric. But more importantly, if you're trying to calculate a factor of safety, the factor of safety that all the software programs calculate is based upon the availability of the yield strength. If you do not have the yield strength information for that material, there is no way for you to get the answer via simulation. So the best thing to do, and all companies do this, all major companies, whenever they are coming up with new materials, they first do material modeling, through which they can figure out material properties via computer simulations, and they do experiments on new materials to calculate strength properties. They use these strength properties in a simulation tool like ANSYS or SolidWorks or LSDyno or Radios, whatever. And that's how these software tools are able to give you the answer. Professor Saho, I hope I answered your question. Okay, awesome, guys. So I think looks like there are no more questions. Professor Kuldeep, feel free to take it from here.
All right, all right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sarang, and I believe that most of the question has been answered. If still anyone wants to ask anything, Mr. Sarang is here. You can write your questions in the chat.
Sure. And guys, how did you like the workshop? Did you feel like you learned something? The first 2 points, right? I said that I'll teach you the basics of CFD, and I said that I'll help you understand what happens behind a CFD solver, right? Do you feel like you guys were able to learn that? Where the two objectives met, at least at a entry level? Typically when I teach courses on CFD, it's a 3-month long course. So expecting an entire outcome in a single day is not possible. But I just want to see if for whatever time we spent, I want to make sure that that was some way useful for you guys. So any feedback that you can share would be very helpful for me.
And yes, for the same, I have sent a feedback form in the chat box. So hopefully, each of you will be able to fill that feedback form so that we can get the response of this workshop. So, Mr. Sarang, you have cleared all the doubts. I guess every student who belongs to civil and mechanical field, or the students who have joined from rest of the engineering sectors, they have got the knowledge about the fundamentals of CFD. So thank you so much, Mr. Sarang, and it was really very nice. And in the same chain, I like to request Mr. Rohit More, who is the manager academia and commercial partnership. So, Mr. Rohit, if you are there, I'd like to say something as we are at the last stage of the workshop. Mr. Rohit.
Kuldeep, I think you have to make Mr. Rohit as a co-host so that he can
Okay.
unmute himself.
I like to request my IT team if you can please make Mr. Rohit co-host. He has joined with his name, Mr. Rohit More. So please make him co-host. Manish sir, can you hear me? Okay. So Mr. Rohit, you are the co-host now. Please share something you'd like to share.
Sure, Professor Patak. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarang, for that wonderful session from your side. Hope students have got a lot of information through that and learned something new in today's session. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Rathod, the chairman of Vikrant Group, to giving us this opportunity and to addressing the students as well. And also Dr. Mr. Patak as well for helping us getting this workshop conducted. After that, it's like students might have gone through the session and hope that was helpful. So this was just a glimpse about how Skullink work. At Skullink, we majorly focuses on the application-oriented trainings, wherein how students can learn what industry is really asking for and what's basically the maths behind a software tool, how that operation is being conducted. So to know more about that, you can anyways visit the Skilllink website and know more about courses which we are offering as well. And looking forward for kind of the partnerships with Vikrant groups, so wherein we can create a win-win situation with for the students as well as for the institute.
Definitely.
With that, I would like to thank Vikrant Group for giving us this opportunity to organize this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Rohit. And it was so nice of you. I must say that it was a very good gesture of yours that you people had said yes to this workshop. And it is one of the finest workshop I ever had in the field of CFD. So at last, at the 11th hour, I'd like to request our Honorable Group Director, sir, he is also joined. Dr. Satyanarayan sir, he has joined all the way from Bengaluru. I'd like to request Dr. Satyanarayan sir to please give vote of thanks to the workshop. Honorable sir.
Good afternoon, Vikram Pranam to all. I've been listening to Mr. Sarang from Skilllink. Okay, and there is one thing we always forget when we teach CFD tool or any of the like answers or some of these tools is we forget to explain the black box concept. It means what is inside this, because the governing differential equation is a very key component which has been highlighted here. I really appreciate Mr. Sarang for explaining in a very simple manner. But you should understand, Mr. Sarang, this is attracts students who are love maths. Okay, who love maths, and they love these equations. That's their lifeblood. It's good that you took up this topic and you explained what is behind the black box. But same time, we have to I used to teach this thing since many years back, and one of the thing was I always tell them validate it. Okay, just don't take the results from answers. It looks very colorful, but you validate it. And many students will say, no, sir, validation is yeah, we got the result, fine. So, but that's good that we always have this mathematics behind it. And equally, I come from an experimental background, so I think we should always look back for hand calculations. We should always look back for experimental verification. Okay, because even if you are thinking about the future, like, digital twins, or we are talking about, if you go into multi-physics, what COMSOL is doing. But there, what happens is it requires a lot of uh, understanding of the math behind it. At the same time, it requires, validation of the results, which I still feel that these are fine, but it has to be validated. Thank you so much, and wonderful presentation. And we look forward, sincerely, we look forward to collaborate with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Honorable Director, sir. And so this is it for this workshop. I like to request each participant to please fill the feedback form I have sent by in the chat box. So just fill it. Till then, definitely we'll meet once again. We are looking forward to have partnership with Skill Link. Thank you so much, Mr. Sarang. Thank you so much, Mr. Rohit. And thanks a lot to all the participants who have joined and for who has joined and who made this workshop really a historical success. Thank you so much, everyone. Vikrant Pranam to all of you.